A billionaire CEO was 3 seconds away from signing the deal of his career when a hotel server pressed a folded note into his palm and disappeared back into the crowd. What he chose to do next left every person in that room completely stunned, and what followed would change both their lives forever. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and at the very end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Colin Marsh was 43 years old, and he had built Marsh & Partners from a 2-room office above a pawn shop in Mississauga into one of the most respected real estate development firms in Eastern Canada. He had done it carefully, deliberately, with a particular kind of patience that people who hadn't grown up with money tend to develop in its place. He did not trust easily. He trusted completely or not at all. The signing ceremony for the Northgate Capital acquisition was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the Grand Ballroom of Toronto's Fairmont Royal York. 30 people sat around the long mahogany table: lawyers, board members, investment partners, executives whose suits cost more than most people earned in a month. The deal was worth $840 million. It would make Marsh & Partners the largest private real estate firm in Eastern Canada. To his left sat Hugo Aldgate, his CFO and his closest friend for 21 years. They had met in second year at the University of Toronto, shared a sublet apartment on Bloor Street with no working radiator, painted the walls of their first office together because they couldn't afford to hire anyone. Colin trusted Hugo the way you trust gravity, without thinking about it at all. A server moved quietly along the far side of the table, refilling water glasses with the practiced invisibility of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Colin uncapped his pen. He felt it before he registered what it was: a small square of folded paper, placed into his open palm with a motion so brief and precise that no one watching from any angle would have caught it. By the time he looked up, the server had moved 2 seats down and was attending to someone else. He closed his fingers around the paper. Hugo leaned toward him. "Ready?" "One moment." Colin set the pen down as if reconsidering a line in the contract and unfolded the note beneath the table's edge. 4 words in tight, controlled print. "Don't sign, room 412, midnight." He folded it again. His face gave nothing away. He had spent 20 years learning to keep it that way. "I'd like to revisit Clause 14 before we proceed," he said. The room went very still. Hugo's smile held, but something behind it did not. "Colin, we've gone over Clause 14 4 times. Then a 5th won't take long." He closed the folder. "Can we break for 30 minutes? At midnight, he knocked on the door of room 412. He had not known what to expect. He had not expected the woman who answered to look at him with the particular calm of someone who had spent the preceding hours deciding exactly what she was going to say and in what order. Her name was Vera Nunez. She was 31 years old. She had been working at the Fairmont for 6 months. She was still in her server's uniform because she had come directly here from her shift. "I know how this looks," she said before he could speak, "so I'll be direct." She had written 3 things on a hotel notepad: a company name, Northgate Holdings, Inc., a number, $15 million, and an account registered in the Cayman Islands. Colin looked at the notepad, then at her. "How do you know about Schedule D?" She held his gaze without moving. "Because I spent 4 years at Delacroix and Wren on Bay Street drafting exactly this kind of document, and I recognized the structure the moment I saw it. Your CFO had the file open on his laptop in the private lounge last Thursday. He was reviewing it alone. I was delivering coffee." She paused. People in his position rarely notice the person handing them the cup. "You're a lawyer." "I was." He sat down. "Tell me what you heard." 3 days before the signing, Vera had been restocking the drink station near the connecting corridor between the private lounge and the banquet prep area. The lounge door was partially open. She'd heard Hugo's voice, low, deliberate, the voice of a man who believed he was entirely alone. He'd been on the phone with a woman named Renata Slade. The name arrived like cold water. Renata had been Colin's fiancée 3 years ago. She had ended the engagement quietly, said she wanted something different, something quieter. She had taken a position at an investment firm in Montreal. He hadn't spoken to her since. According to what Vera had overheard, Renata was a co-director of Northgate Holdings, Inc., the Cayman-registered entity that would, upon Colin's signature, receive controlling interest in Marsh and Partners through a series of asset transfers buried in Schedule D, an addendum added to the master contract 6 days ago without Colin's knowledge. Once the transfer was complete, Colin would retain a nominal title. Hugo and Renata would hold the actual company. "You took notes," Colin said. She showed him her phone. The timestamps matched. The details were precise and legally coherent. Not the partial memory of someone who'd half-heard a conversation. The notes of someone who had known exactly what they were listening to. He studied her for a long moment. "You understand what you're risking?" "Yes." "Hugo will find out." "Probably." "Then why? You have nothing to gain from this." She looked toward the window, where the lights of downtown Toronto stretched out below them in long amber lines. "My sister's name is Paloma. She's 24. She was diagnosed with acute leukemia 18 months ago. I left Delacroix and Wren when the firm pressured me to resign after I flagged a compliance issue they didn't want addressed. I've been here since October because the benefits package includes supplemental medical coverage for dependents." She turned back to him. "Watching someone get quietly robbed of everything they built, while the people around them smile. I've seen it done before. I couldn't stay quiet a second time." He left room 412 at 1:10 in the morning, carrying everything she had given him. He told her he would verify what he could on his own. "Be careful," she said as he stepped into the hallway. He didn't sleep. He sat in front of his computer in his office on the 38th floor and went through every version of the acquisition folder. He found Schedule D on the third pass, tucked inside a subfolder labeled Technical Appendices. Legal Review V.4, uploaded 6 days earlier by Hugo's assistant. No notification had been sent to Colin. He read it 3 times. Then he accessed the company's banking records using his CEO credentials. He traced a $15 million transfer, listed in the ledger as a pre-closing legal retainer. The account number was one he didn't recognize. He ran it through the corporate verification system. The account belonged to a holding company in Grand Cayman, the co-directors on file, Hugo Aldgate and Renata Slade. Colin sat back. Outside the window, the first pale light was lifting over Lake Ontario. He thought about the first office, the radiator that never worked. The afternoon Hugo had driven 3 hours to sit with him on the front steps of his condo the night Renata called off the engagement. The same man who had, it now appeared, been building something with Renata that required Colin to be removed. He copied everything to 2 drives, emailed the files to himself from a personal account, cleared his browser history, and called Vera. She answered on the second ring. "I found all of it," he said. A brief pause. "All of it?" "Every piece." Hugo moved against Vera the following afternoon. Colin had known something was coming. He hadn't known it would happen so quickly or so publicly. At 12:15, Vera was called to the hotel lobby. She arrived to find approximately 60 staff members, guests, and hotel personnel, and Hugo standing at the center of it, holding a printed still from a security camera, and presenting it to the hotel manager with the grave, measured concern of a man who had rehearsed this. A watch belonging to one of the Northgate Capital delegates had been reported missing. Security footage showed Vera near the private lounge at the relevant time. Hugo had brought the matter directly to management given the sensitivity of the ongoing business relationship. Colin was there. He had been told about the meeting 5 minutes earlier by Hugo, who had shown him the security image and asked him to authorize Vera's immediate dismissal. Colin had said he needed to review the full footage. Hugo had told him there wasn't time. Now Colin stood near the back of the gathered crowd and watched Vera face the room. She stood with her shoulders level and her face composed, not blank, but deliberate. The composure of someone who has decided, well in advance of this moment, that she will not be the one to come apart. "I have not taken anything," she said clearly to the room rather than to Hugo. "This is a misunderstanding." "The evidence suggests otherwise, Miss Nunez." Hugo's voice carried the tone of regret applied like a coat of paint. "We won't be pursuing legal action, given your clean record here, but your employment is terminated effective immediately." She looked at Colin. He saw the question in it, not a plea, but a reckoning. She had already worked out the answer. She simply wanted to confirm it. He said nothing. He had told himself he needed 1 more hour to be certain of what he was doing. Later, he would understand that certainty had never been the issue. He had been afraid. Not of Hugo, but of the particular vertigo that arrives when the ground you've built your whole life on opens beneath your feet. Vera collected her belongings from the coat room. The security guard held the front door. She stopped in the doorway and turned to look at Colin across the lobby. "When you know the truth," she said audibly, "remember that you were standing right here, and that you had a choice." The door closed. He went to her apartment that evening. It was in Leslieville, a narrow brick building on a side street east of Coxwell. 3rd floor, number 6, he knocked. She opened the door and looked at him for a long moment before stepping back to let him in. The apartment was small and carefully kept. Family photographs on the windowsill, medical paperwork in neat stacks on the kitchen table. From the back room came the quiet sound of a television. "My sister's home," Vera said. Paloma came into the room a few minutes later, younger than Vera, moving with the careful economy of someone conserving energy, but with the same direct dark eyes and the same quality of attention. She shook Colin's hand and smiled and said she'd heard good things about him, and then excused herself to go back to her program. Colin and Vera sat at the kitchen table. He told her everything he'd found. He told her he was sorry. He didn't qualify it or soften it. "You left me standing there," she said. "I know. I can't undo what that felt like." "No." He looked at the papers on the table. "I can't undo what I did. I can only try to do better from this point forward." He paused. "Paloma's treatment." "No." She said it quietly, but without any flexibility in it. "I don't want your money. I don't want your pity. I want you to leave." He left. He walked back through the autumn streets to where he'd parked, the wind off the lake finding the gaps in his jacket, thinking about what it cost someone to keep their dignity intact when the world was doing its level best to strip it away. The next morning, he called Toronto General's Patient Financial Services Department and arranged an anonymous donation through their hardship assistance program, enough to cover the remainder of Paloma's treatment. He asked them to present it as a foundation grant for eligible cases. He did not tell Vera. 3 days later, she called him. "Was it you?" she said, not a question. A pause. "It was a grant program." Colin. Paloma needed the treatment. That's the whole of it. She didn't thank him, but something in the silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. They met for coffee the following Saturday at a diner on Queen Street East. She was in her own clothes, jeans, a dark wool sweater, and looked entirely different from the composed, uniformed server he'd first spoken to. She looked like herself. It struck him that he didn't yet know who that was, and that he wanted to. He laid out what he had: Schedule D, the wire transfers, the Cayman registration documents, and a set of audio recordings copied from a digital recorder Hugo kept in his own office. Recordings Hugo had apparently been making for months as insurance against Renata, recordings that now constituted clear and damning evidence of a conspiracy to commit fraud. Vera asked 3 questions, each of them precise and legally informed. Then she looked at him across the table and said she was in. Hugo arrived at Colin's office Monday morning without knocking. He placed a folder on the desk and sat down with the relaxed confidence of a man who had arrived at the part of the plan he'd been anticipating. Inside the folder, photographs of Colin at Vera's building, photographs of them at the Queen Street diner, and a printout of what appeared to be a corporate transfer authorizing funds from Marsh and Partners' discretionary account to a medical services provider, modified to bear Colin's authentication code. The terms were simple. Colin would cancel the board presentation he had quietly scheduled for Thursday. He would sign the Northgate acquisition by end of week. He would have no further contact with Vera Nunez. In exchange, the fabricated evidence would stay in the folder. "And if I don't cooperate," Colin said, "then this goes to the board and the press, and by the end of the month, you're the CEO who used company funds to manage an affair with a dismissed employee." Hugo spread his hands. "I also have enough connections in commercial real estate to make sure Ms. Nunez doesn't find work in this city again. And her sister's situation." He let it sit there, unfinished, which was worse than finishing it. Colin looked at his friend of 21 years. "Get out of my office," he said quietly. "Colin, you have until Thursday morning." Vera had already moved. That same evening, she had returned to the Fairmont through the service entrance she'd used hundreds of times as a staff member. She knew the building, the timing, the security rotation, the layout of every floor. She retrieved Hugo's office recorder, copied every audio file to her phone, and returned it before the next patrol. The final recording was from that afternoon. Hugo's voice detailing the plan precisely. Renata's voice advising him on which board members were likely to be sympathetic. Vera was at Colin's door on the Esplanade at 6:15 Tuesday morning. He answered looking like a man who hadn't slept. "I have everything," she said. He listened to the recordings. She watched something settle in him. The specific quality of stillness that arrives when a person stops being uncertain and simply decides. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she agreed. The boardroom on the 38th floor held 16 people that morning. Board members, counsel, and 3 Northgate Capital representatives who had arrived expecting a signing. Hugo and Renata were already seated at the far end of the table, comfortable, composed. Their expressions adjusted when Vera walked in behind Colin and took the chair at his right. Colin introduced her as his newly appointed general counsel, effective that morning. Hugo began to stand. "This is completely." "Please sit down." Colin's voice was pleasant and completely final. Vera connected her laptop to the display. She was unhurried and precise. She walked the room through both versions of the contract, the one the board had approved, and Schedule D, which none of them had ever seen. She showed the wire transfer records. She showed the Cayman registration for Northgate Holdings, Inc., with Hugo Aldgate and Renata Slade listed as co-directors. Then she played the recording. Hugo's voice filled the room. Unmistakable, unhurried, 18 months of planning delivered in his own words. Renata stood. "Those recordings are inadmissible." "They were made on a device Mr. Aldgate placed in his own office," Vera said. "He recorded his own conversations. I copied the files. The question of admissibility is interesting, but it won't matter much in this room." She clicked to the next slide. "What will matter are the wire transfer records which Mr. Marsh obtained through his own authorized CEO credentials, and which show $15 million moved to a foreign holding company that the two of you control." The Northgate representatives were absolutely still. Colin looked at Hugo. He watched the precise moment Hugo understood it was finished. Not a collapse, but a particular kind of deflation, like watching a building settle. "Hugo," Colin said. "Renata." He kept his voice level. "I've been sitting here trying to feel angry. What I mostly feel is sad. 21 years. He paused. "You could have just asked me for more." 2 RCMP officers entered through the boardroom's rear door. Hugo said something as they approached, something about Colin being too principled for his own good, about small men with small ambitions, words that had clearly been prepared for a different kind of exit. They didn't land the way he'd wanted them to. Colin didn't respond. The room was very quiet as Hugo and Renata were led out. After a moment, the lead Northgate representative cleared his throat carefully. "Mr. Marsh, I want to be clear that Northgate Capital had no knowledge of or involvement in these arrangements. When you're ready, we would very much like to discuss a legitimate partnership." Colin nodded. "We'll be in touch." 3 weeks later, Paloma's final treatment was declared a complete success. Vera got the call while reviewing contracts in her new office on the 37th floor, a corner office with a view she had not yet entirely adjusted to occupying. She stepped into the corridor to let herself cry for a few minutes, quietly, before going back to the document on her screen. Colin appeared at her open door, an hour later, with coffee made exactly the way she took it, because in 3 weeks he had paid attention. "Paloma," she said, "she's clear." He smiled, a real one, the kind that arrived on his face rarely and entirely without calculation. "That deserves celebrating. It deserves 12 hours of sleep and a very long phone call with my mother." She looked at him over the rim of her cup. "But yes, eventually, celebrating." The celebration happened 6 weeks after that, at a rented cottage in Niagara-on-the-Lake in mid-November. The vineyards were bare and the lake was a flat silver, and Paloma was there, warm and healthy, laughing at something Colin had said that he would later claim wasn't even that funny. Vera was standing at the end of the dock, looking at the water, when Colin came to stand beside her. He had been quiet for the last hour in the specific way he got quiet before saying something he'd been composing for a while. "Vera," he said, "I know what you're about to do. Do you? You've been very unconvincingly casual for the past 40 minutes. He laughed. She heard him reach into his jacket. She turned around. The ring was simple, a single stone set low, nothing excessive, which meant he had been paying genuine attention. The look on his face was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. Not the boardroom steadiness, not the careful control. Just a man who had made a decision and was hoping very much that it was the right one. "You came into my life with 4 words on a folded note," he said, "and I have been a better person every day since. I don't want to stop." He paused. "Vera Nunez, will you marry me?" She looked at him. At the water behind him, the lights of the town, the shape of Paloma, standing at the cottage window with both hands pressed over her mouth. "Yes," she said, "obviously yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. She raised an eyebrow. "I asked Paloma," he said before she could ask. They were married in April, in a small ceremony in the conservatory of a heritage inn on the Danforth. 40 guests among the early spring blossoms. Paloma was the maid of honor, dancing enthusiastically to a song that was slightly too fast for the occasion and entirely perfect because of it. At the dinner, the new board chair made a toast to Marsh and Partners, which in the 6 months since the fraudulent acquisition had been unwound, had grown its portfolio by 22% and signed a clean, legitimate partnership with the actual Northgate Capital team. Vera accepted the toast with a glass of sparkling water. Colin noticed. He had been noticing things about her for months. It was becoming his primary occupation. She caught him noticing, and smiled, and said nothing, because some news deserved its own moment, and she had chosen this one carefully. Later, on the rooftop terrace of the inn, after the guests had gone home and the lights of Toronto glittered on the western horizon, Colin stood beside her in the mild April air and said, very quietly, "You haven't been drinking tonight." "I haven't," she said. He waited. 8 weeks, she said. He turned to look at her. She watched his face do something she hadn't seen it do before. The careful, managed expression that had carried him through 20 years of negotiations simply gave way, like a door opening onto something undefended and entirely real. He pulled her close and held her without speaking. 8 weeks, he said finally into her hair. Give or take. He laughed and she felt it, and above them the April sky did its particular Toronto thing. Half cloud, half clear, a scattering of stars visible where the city's glow left room for them. A note with 4 words, a midnight meeting. 2 people with enough courage to tell the truth when it cost them something, and enough stubbornness to keep going after they'd paid the price. Sometimes the most important thing a person can offer you is the truth you weren't looking for. And sometimes the bravest person in the room is the one everyone looked straight through. What did you think of Vera and Colin's story? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. And on a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate it? Don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you never miss a new story. And if you're looking for what to watch next, we have something right here we think you'll love.